As a package, the Kingdom Come Deliverance games are one of the best original and sequel combinations I've ever played. The first game laid the foundation not only with mechanics and systems, but the narrative, so the second game could build on that in effectively every way and run with it. KCD 1 walked so that 2 could soar. If you've already played these games, you probably know these are some of the best RPGs of recent years. Thanks to its deep mechanics, focus on realism without being gratuitous, attention to detail, and incredible storytelling with fleshed out characters, top-tier voice acting and music, all while managing to craft a cohesive story within the confines of real historical events. This has all been talked about in great detail by others, but what I really love about these games as a collective is how they managed to tell one of the best hero's journeys I've seen in video games. I replayed KCD 1 shortly before 2 came out to get a refresher on the story, and playing these two games back to back, it really hit me how well thought out and developed Henry's journey is throughout these games. How it manages to take the player on this journey with Henry and completely transform him to the point where it's crazy to think back to who he was when the journey began and believe it's the same person. The hero's journey, when done well, is extremely satisfying across any medium. Some of the most popular and beloved stories ever, like Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, are perfect examples of that. To see the protagonist, the hero, through countless tragedies, trials, and tribulations, transform into their best potential self can be very fulfilling and inspirational to the audience when written well. It feels like you're getting to grow and experience this journey with the characters. And there are very few other games or game series that I feel have executed this as perfectly as Kingdom Come Deliverance. In general, it's not too common in video games, especially now, that you get to follow the same protagonist's journey through multiple games. I've spent like 250 hours living through the eyes of Henry at this point. I've gotten to see him at the highest of highs and lowest of lows. As a player, I've gotten to help shape and mold him into the hero he has become, which is a unique benefit to video games as a medium that you won't get in a book, show, or movie. It's an interactive medium. You are Henry. By playing and progressing in the game, you are developing him as a character. You have an active role in sculpting him into who he's becoming rather than simply spectating, which is why video games can be so powerful as a storytelling medium. The player in these games is going on their own journey right alongside Henry. You start at the bottom with him in KCD 1 in terms of gameplay. The combat can initially feel very overwhelming and challenging, but as you spend more time getting comfortable with it, learning the mechanics and timings of everything, practicing combos and master strikes, through building up muscle memory, you get better. Things begin to get easier. There's a strong learning curve. You're improving at things like combat, stealth, even learning how to read, as Henry himself is progressing narratively. The gameplay and story progression are working harmoniously to create a cohesive experience between Henry and the player. Henry, narratively, is leagues stronger by the end of KCD 2 compared to where he started at the beginning of the first game. And I myself was much better at combat too, where I struggled to take down a single enemy at first in KCD 1, to then fending off hordes with relative ease by the end. Part of that was having better armor, weapons, and stats, but it was mostly me. I just got better through experience and training like Henry did. That doesn't just apply to combat either, that applies to archery, alchemy, even something as simple as lockpicking. So in that sense, I really do feel like Henry. The player is developing Henry's skills. Furthermore, these games have very natural progression systems that kind of mirror real life. You progress in levels and attributes by just playing. You get more levels in warfare by just fighting. You get better skills and combos with a particular weapon by continuing to use it. Like real life, you get better at something through repetition and learning from someone who knows it better than you. Then you get better armor and weapons as you progress too, going from effectively a peasant in rags to a knight in shining armor. It's a very simple but potent visual representation of how much you and Henry have progressed. It makes that struggle in the early game and overcoming that so satisfying. The player's journey with the gameplay is running parallel to Henry's journey in the story. That's something no other medium aside from video games can pull off. Now, obviously a big part of the equation in a hero's journey is the hero themselves. What about Henry makes him the perfect protagonist for these games, for this specific journey? Many RPGs in a similar vein to KCD, like Bethesda games for example, opt to go with mute protagonists, complete blank slates for players to inhabit, customize, and roleplay as. But KCD, more like The Witcher, has a voiced, defined, singular protagonist. However, you make many choices as Henry. Rather than the player creating their own character to inhabit, they're inhabiting an established human being. There's nothing wrong with mute protagonists in RPGs, by the way, that can work very well, but what makes Henry such an ideal RPG protagonist is he kind of hits the sweet spot and gets the best of both worlds, somewhere between a mute protagonist and a fully characterized and voiced one. Henry still has his own distinct traits, personality, and motives that the player does not give him, it's just who he is, while there still being enough blank space for you to fill in and impose yourself on. So we as a player can still feel like we are Henry while we're playing, with him still being his own person with his own unique characteristics and desires. Warhorse hit a really nice balance with his character. There's also this simplicity to Henry, in a good way, that makes him very easy to understand and relate to. They make it so easy for you to empathize and root for him early on, which is what you want from the protagonist of a hero's journey. The premise of his journey and arc is simple and understandable, but done in such a compelling and effective manner. The broad idea of his arc is you're taking this below-average Joe who's a peasant that's lost everything and turning him into this mature, badass knight on his quest for revenge. I know he's not technically a peasant, nor is he ever officially knighted, but that's what the journey feels like. Then obviously as you delve into it, it's more nuanced, fleshed out, and becomes more complex, but the general idea of the premise is such a simple but compelling one. Henry is likable, he's relatable, and his journey is inspirational. He can also be a bit of a fish out of water, as he spent most of his life in Skalitz, so most of the places he goes to on his journey are places he's never been. Similar to most likely a lot of players who are new to this world, they're kind of experiencing all this for the first time with Henry. That makes him the perfect set of eyes to see this world through.
Your mother and Martin would surely be proud of you.
Perhaps. In a way.
Of course they would. You avenged them. You prevented a war, you saved a lot of people, and after all that, you're still in one piece. That's not a bad performance for an ordinary bastard. You even succeeded in getting that adventurous sword of ours back.
Henry! Get up now. There's work to be done.
Mother.
Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is set up so that even those who didn't play the first game can still jump in and understand the story. The game cleverly recaps KCD 1 through hallucinations and nightmares Henry has during the first act. However, I strongly believe you're doing yourself a disservice by skipping the first game and jumping directly into KCD 2. It's still fantastic if you choose to do that, don't get me wrong, but having the full perspective of the story and Henry's character arc with all the foundation setting from the first game makes KCD 2 infinitely better. If it weren't for the legwork the first game put in, the second game would not hit nearly as hard. KCD 1 is a lot of setup, while KCD 2 is a lot of payoff. Because of everything the first game established, it makes all the payoffs in the sequel that much more satisfying. People played through hundreds of hours and waited years to see some of these plot threads resolved, so it's harder to appreciate who Henry is and has become at the end of KCD 2 if you weren't there with him at rock bottom where it all began. Before we can appreciate this version of Henry, we have to go back to where he started.
Get up or I'll come get you up, you slugabed.
Hear that? You'd better not vex him.
Almost all of the best heroes' journeys start with the hero being absolutely pathetic in the beginning. We meet them in their ordinary world where they're not good or skilled at really anything but have some kind of desire or call to adventure. It's a necessity to have them start like this, so those moments where the hero grows and overcomes are rewarding. With Henry of Skalitz, this is absolutely the case. When we first meet our beloved hero, he's anything but at that point. He's sleeping late into the day, hungover from a night of drinking with his friends, while he should be assisting his father Martin the blacksmith at the smithy. He's initially depicted as lazy, a bit childish, really whiny.
Ma? Ma! I'm hurt. You won't stop bleeding.
And, well, for lack of a better term, simple-minded. He can't read or write, which, to be fair, wasn't uncommon for a blacksmith's son at the time, but he clearly didn't have much of an education. Henry's age is left very ambiguous in these games. Despite his appearance, he may not even be an adult. Regardless, it's obvious he still hasn't really matured or grown up. Him and his friends get up to a lot of mischief, and he's secretly been learning swordsmanship to the dismay of his parents, and he's quite inept at that too. I mean, even Teresa manages to kick his ass. Henry is kind of, sort of, useless, and he lacks purpose. He doesn't want to follow in his father's footsteps and become a blacksmith and trapped in a small town his entire life. He has the call to adventure. He wants to leave and explore the outside world, feeling like a greater destiny lies in store for him.
Will you teach me how to use it like Sir Radzig said?
Why?
Well, it could come in useful. Maybe I'll travel a bit before settling down. I'd like to know more than the tavern on the green and the forge.
In these kinds of stories, there's always typically some kind of external force that pushes the protagonist into that adventure. Chances are, if the hero has parents at the start of the story, you know what's about to happen to them. So the tragic irony for Henry is that his wish is granted at the cost of everything he has when Skalitz is invaded and his parents are killed right in front of him by Markvart Vaunalitz and the Cumans, where all he can do is stand and watch, paralyzed and powerless. This moment not only marks the starting point of his long and tumultuous journey, but one that will constantly be referred back to and define the trajectory of Henry's character. Forced to leave the only life he's ever known, he's driven by revenge and guilt. Guilt for not being able to do anything to save his parents, for being weak, for running away and acting like a coward. This survivor's guilt Henry feels is what pushes him forward. From this moment onward, he vows to never run away again and to avenge his parents by killing Vaunalitz. After Henry arrives in Talmberg and recovers, he's desperate to get back to Skalitz to bury his parents. His thought being, if I couldn't save them, the least I could do is bury them. The problem is Skalitz is swarming with bandits, and Henry has undergone zero training since the invasion. He's eager to be brave and face his enemies, to not run away again, but at this point has done no training or work to actually improve. Naturally, his haste nearly gets him killed when he's ambushed by Runt and his group of bandits, getting completely embarrassed in a duel in the process. The journey would have ended right then and there if not for Teresa and Sir Robard. There's still a big cost though, as he loses the sword his father made for Sir Radzig to Runt, who manages to escape in the process. The last thing he had of his father that he was entrusted with delivering. All Henry's feelings of guilt and vengeance are embodied in that sword. This is where Henry officially hits rock bottom. Defeated, battered, and broken, losing the one remaining thing he had left of his father. The next step in the hero's journey is the beginning of the transformation, and it's not until Henry hits that rock bottom that the transformation can actually begin. Once Henry recovers in Rattay, he meets allies and mentors that help aid in his development into a proper warrior. He learns the basics of combat from Captain Bernard, becomes frenemies with Hans Capon, and through more experience and training, Henry begins to rise in standing and is assigned more important missions. He goes from simply being a part of the Rattay City Guard, to helping and then having to save Hans Capon from Cumans, leading to him being taken into Sir Radzig's service, rewarded with his own horse, and being brought along to help with the investigation of the Neuhof massacre, where he once again proves himself by finding those responsible. It's during this process when the player also gets better at and more familiar with the game's various systems, most notably combat. Again, as Henry improves, so do we. That rise wouldn't be anywhere near as satisfying if we first didn't see Henry be beaten and defeated at every turn and have to build himself back up from nothing. His growth and development culminates to this point in his rematch with Runt. This is a very clear way to show how much Henry has grown and progressed thus far, this time defeating and killing Runt. This may seem like a bit of a quick turnaround since in the game's timeline it's only been about a month since their first encounter, but when you consider Runt is just a simple brigand, and Henry now having some actual formal combat training under his belt from Bernard and some more experience, it makes perfect sense why he's now able to defeat someone like Runt in one-on-one combat. He still has a long way to go in avenging his parents at this point though. In fact, he only encounters Markvart von Alitz once after Skalitz in the first game, and doesn't even get the opportunity to confront him until near the end of KCD 2. A crucial point in many heroes' journeys is when everything the hero has learned is put to the ultimate test. There's often a point in these stories where once the protagonist has begun to ascend to their peak, some massive revelation causes them to spiral, question, and doubt everything they've learned, been through, and have been fighting for. The most iconic example of this being once again from Star Wars.
I am your father.
Ironically enough, Henry's revelation involves the true identity of his father too. This moment comes when he tries to become a spy and infiltrate the army that employed Runt and had been terrorizing nearby settlements. His cover is quickly blown though when he runs into the leader Eric and Ishvan Toth, the man who had accompanied Sir Radzig and Skalitz at the beginning of the game. Henry is captured and tortured, where he not only learns that Toth had a hand in the massacre at Skalitz, but that he also has his father's sword. And if that wasn't enough, Toth reveals to Henry that Sir Radzig is his biological father. Everything Henry had known and believed in to this point is flipped on its head. His world is shattered. Toth becomes the game's primary antagonist and immediately shoots up the list of priorities for Henry. The goal has shifted to killing Toth and reclaiming his father's, or I guess stepfather's sword, and delivering it to his real father, Sir Radzig. But Henry doesn't accomplish this goal in the first game. After the Siege of Talmberg, Toth escapes with the sword, not to be seen again until the sequel. While Henry has grown a considerable amount since the beginning of the game, his hero's journey is still far from over. He didn't reclaim the sword, Toth and von Alitz are still out there, his parents remain unavenged. It's a big cliffhanger, but still a satisfying progression for Henry's character, who started out as a pathetic, lazy, whiny blacksmith's son who had aspirations about exploring the outside world and going on an adventure, to a formidable warrior, the bastard son of a lord, and someone entrusted with an important mission to deliver a message to Otto von Berghoff in hopes of ending the war. A strong but rather open-ended and inconclusive ending left on a cliffhanger. It was always clear this was far from the end, that Henry's journey would continue in a sequel, and continue it certainly does.
Fortuna you art!
What's that you keep yelling, Sir Hans?
Good gracious, Harry, you don't mean...
KCD 2 picks up basically right where the first game ends, about a couple days after, only Henry has seen a bit of a glow up since the first game. This visual transformation fits with his growth and development as a character. He had this innocent, sort of bright-eyed look to him in the first game, and now he looks more mature, like he's seen some things. Though the logistics of how he looks so different over the course of a couple days is a little confusing, but you can already tell he's at a much higher starting point in KCD 2 compared to where he started in the first game. He's already got armor, levels, and combat skill, though that doesn't really last long, and make no mistake, he's still seeking revenge, traumatized by what happened in Skalitz. It's easy to forget that in the game's timeline, it's only been a couple months since Skalitz was invaded at this point, Playing the games, it feels like it may have been a lot longer than that, especially with the real-life 7-year gap in between games, but for Henry, it's all still very fresh. Right from the start, Henry is put into a similar situation to what happened in Skalitz, albeit under different circumstances, when his group is ambushed by bandits. However, this time he refuses to just stand and watch, by drawing the attention of the bandits to save Catherine. He swore over the bodies of his parents that he wouldn't run away anymore. He never wanted to feel that powerlessness again. Which is chivalrous and all, but he and Hans are completely defenseless. That leads to the chase in the woods, where Henry takes a massive fall that functions as a soft reset for him. A lot of levels and skills just fall right out of him, not to mention losing his armor and weapons earlier. It's a convenient way to have the player start over with the gameplay and progression systems, to once again create that satisfying progression loop of struggling at first, and steadily overcoming that struggle throughout the game. A lot of sequels do this as they need some reason for the main character to be nerfed a bit in the beginning, so the players can build them back up, although it's still a higher starting point from where Henry was in the first game. He can still fight and is not completely useless like he was in KCD1's opening, and on a mechanical level, as a player, I'm still familiar and used to the combat system. Sure, there's a bit of an adjustment from the first game to the second, with the reworking of ripostes and master strikes, but mainly it just feels a lot more responsive and polished. So, while nerfed and having to rebuild in terms of armor and weaponry, it never felt like I was starting from scratch, from the absolute bottom. And it's the same with Henry, he's still more than capable in a fight. This is evident a bit later on when he's able to defeat Jan Žižka in a duel. In a couple months, our boy has gone from getting demolished by a lowly bandit to handedly defeating a military leader in one-on-one combat. I kind of felt like a proud father during this moment. Henry then finally finds Istvan Toth and his father's sword, who we've been searching for damn near a game and a half at this point. Toth is such a good antagonist, his actor does an incredible job of just making him so hateable, and with all the history and build up to this moment, we want to kill Toth just as badly as Henry does. The reunion doesn't stop there either. Toth is working with Markvart von Alitz, whom Henry hasn't even seen since Talmberg at the beginning of KCD1. Finally killing this little weasel and reclaiming the sword has to be one of the most satisfying feelings I've ever experienced in a video game. That's only enhanced because of all the build-up from the first game. People who didn't play KCD1 would not feel as accomplished here as those who did. Finally, after all that, Toth is dead, and the sword's back in Henry's possession. It had enough build-up so that the moment felt earned and satisfying without being too slow and dragged out. Having this occur a little earlier in the game, as opposed to the very end, was definitely the right call. Especially since von Alitz is really the main target Henry has had his sights set on from the start. And with how long it took to reclaim the sword, you can be sure once I got it, I never unequipped it. I spent way too long searching for this thing, and with all its narrative significance, I could never bring myself to unequip. It helps that it's genuinely strong too when you get it reforged. There are so many times in RPGs where you'll get a weapon with major story significance, but it's actually really weak and you just end up selling it because it's worthless in gameplay. Thankfully that wasn't the case here. That would have been so underwhelming with how long it took to reclaim it. With Toth dead though, Henry's still far from finished. He basically created his own personal hit list that includes Eric, von Berghoff, and of course Markvart von Alitz. The second game takes a bit of a deeper dive into Henry's psyche and explores his internal conflict as he goes down this path of revenge. Henry's doubts take the form of first Martin and then Toth in his own nightmares, questioning whether his revenge is worth it, if it makes him feel better, and if in the process he's becoming like the very people he wants to kill. The revenge plot is one that's been done 1,000 times, especially in video games, but KCD has a more refreshing and nuanced approach to it than most. Martin is Henry's moral compass, the light, the angel on his shoulder, hence why in these scenes he appears as this light within the dark, and as Henry goes on about who he's going to kill next, he becomes enveloped in red, and the light from Martin then fades. In these nightmares, Henry is questioning himself. There's a part of him appearing as Martin, wondering if this is really the kind of life he wants. One soaked in blood and death. Henry's desire for revenge is human, and very justified. The people he's going after, most of them anyway, deserve it. but is that the kind of life he wants? Is walking that path worth the cost to himself? That's what he's conflicted about, and he knows that his parents, especially Martin, wouldn't want that for him. Then you have Toth, who teases and pokes at Henry that they're really not so different. Even in death, he still torments him. If his father is the angel on his shoulder, then Toth is the devil. And again, these aren't actually them in the afterlife speaking to Henry, they're just manifestations of his own thoughts and fears. Henry's questioning whether in the process he's becoming just like Toth.
My family was slain too, by the Turks. I felt just like you do. And Eric went through the same thing. That's why I took him in. We're one big family. Of orphans. Well, of course you do have a father, although he's not gone so far as to give you his name.
Perhaps my favorite scene of the entire game, maybe of both games, is when Henry finally comes face to face with his parents' killer, Markvart von Alitz. But unlike Toth, von Alitz's death doesn't feel all that satisfying or fulfilling, intentionally so. Henry comes to realize in his first actual time meeting him, before Henry would only see him from afar, that he's not the monster he had perceived him to be. Von Alitz remembers everyone he's killed, including Henry's parents, and clearly feels some remorse. He's a father and family man himself. This takes Henry by surprise because it suddenly makes this monster he's been chasing the entire time appear human, and everything he did was what he felt he had to do for the greater good in his mind. Again, Henry is confronted with the realization that some of the people he hates and wants to kill aren't so different from himself. As von Alitz says, Henry has killed lots of people to get to where he is, potentially mothers and fathers like his own parents. This scene really opens Henry's eyes to the complexity of war, where people and sides can't be simply categorized as good and evil. Sigismund and Wenceslas are both flawed. Hearing von Alitz describe what Wenceslas had done to his wife made me think, am I on the right side here? Something Henry surely thought too, and never even had to consider before. War is a nasty business after all, and when von Alitz asked Henry if he remembered everybody he killed like him, I was taken aback because as a player, I definitely didn't. We've killed so many people by this point that it all just kind of blurs together. The writing in this scene is just phenomenal, and it leaves von Alitz's fate to the player. You came all this way to kill him. Do you embrace Henry's desire for rage and vengeance by killing him dishonorably where he sits? Do you show some respect by putting him out of his misery and suffering in the honorable way he wants with a dignified death? Or do you just leave him to succumb to his wounds? When I chose to give von Alitz a dignified death, I didn't feel joy or ultimate satisfaction like I did after killing Toth. I just felt kind of sad and empty, and it's clear Henry did too. Von Alitz was just a man who fought and was willing to die for what he believed in, like many soldiers. Yeah, he killed innocents, but depending on your choices, Henry or his allies have done the same in the name of war. It just all felt so authentic to how complicated and ugly war can be. It's been a long time since a game's story and a specific scene had impacted me that much. Backtracking a little here, another sequence I love from Henry's journey in this game is when he's made a commander by Žižka during the siege of Suchdal. Not only is it crazy to think in a few months he went from a peasant with essentially nothing and nobody to the commander of a pivotal battle, but this title required Henry to further grow and mature, as the lives of some of his friends and allies were now directly in his hands. This is put to the test when he's required to select 3 men from his unit for what's effectively appearing to be a suicide mission. And the game puts this in your control. You choose who goes out there to risk their lives and potentially die. This is the kind of impossible choices commanders have to make and wear the burden of. And I felt it, because some of the characters in Henry's unit are characters I really cared about and didn't want to die. So I was stuck with this very difficult choice. Do I select the 3 weakest links of my unit as cannon fodder that will certainly die on the mission, so that I don't risk losing some of my strongest soldiers and favorite characters, like Kubienka and Samuel? Or do I send my strongest and most trusted out there in hopes that they'll be able to keep a level head and survive? It took me ages to come to a decision, but in the end I went with the latter, and it worked out. They all survived. But I really felt like Henry in this situation, where, as a commander, I had to make the tough choice. I felt like I had the real responsibility of an actual commander, and again, I've never felt that in a game before. If the people I selected went out there and died, that would have been on me and I would have felt terrible. They do a really good job of aligning the player's feelings with Henry's. You're almost always feeling and thinking some of the same things he is in these pivotal moments. By the end of the game, Henry has really seen and been through a lot, with a new perspective on war and how messy, brutal, and at times complicated it can be. He's finally at a point where he can start to understand what his father was trying to tell him about an adventurous life. This final scene with Henry's parents is a way to essentially sum up the choices you made throughout the game. And whether Henry is happy and feels remorse after winning the day and finally getting vengeance is left up to the choice of the player. The game leaves that up to you and how you felt about your own actions and decisions. However, it's important to remember that these aren't actually Henry's parents. They're manifestations of his own self-consciousness, which is why they can act sanctimonious and critical depending on your choices and how you played the game. It's basically self-loathing and guilt on the part of Henry that simply appears in the form of his parents, who've been the moral compass in his mind throughout both games. No amount of scolding from imaginary parents will make me regret killing that snake Brabant. From those actually living, his friends, allies, and father, he's a hero. That's what matters. It's not just Henry's emotional state that's left to the decision of the player though, it's also what he chooses to do next. Does he continue the life of adventure and warrior, or does he realize that life isn't for him and that Martin was right all along by settling down? KCD 2 then ends with this beautiful scene mirroring one of the final scenes of KCD 1 with Henry and Radzig. Henry finally, after this incredible journey, accomplishes his mission from the beginning, delivering the sword to Sir Radzig. Now, based on what path you choose for Henry in the future determines whether Radzig has Henry keep the sword. But if you do keep it, seeing it go from being called Radzig's sword to Henry's sword is a really cool touch that gives a bigger sense of completeness to Henry's arc. The weak, naive Henry from the start of KCD 1 is long gone, no longer blind to the realities of war. And although KCD 2 has a satisfying ending that resolved a majority of the plot threads, I still don't believe this is the end of Henry's hero's journey. Eric and von Berghoff are still out there, King Wenceslas is still captive in Vienna. It'd be underwhelming if we never got to free or meet him with all the discussion about him in both games. There's still Capon's wedding, and this inevitable decision Henry may have to make between staying in Capon's service or accepting Zizka's offer to be his right-hand man. I'd still like to see Henry potentially be knighted and made Radzig's legitimate son. Then, eventually, the perfect ending for Henry, to me, would be after his life of adventure, he'd finally have a full understanding of what Martin was trying to tell him at the beginning, leading him back to Skalitz to rebuild and settle down with whichever of the romance options you choose, and live out the rest of his life peacefully. You can choose this as one of the options for what Henry wants in the future, but you don't actually get to see that play out. That'd be the perfect full circle ending to his hero's journey, in my opinion, returning to where it all began and mirroring what Martin went through in his life. Whether they conclude his story in another game or a DLC, I just hope we can get a more definitive resolution to those still remaining loose ends. Henry's journey and development throughout these two games is just about perfect to me. It's one of the most fulfilling and satisfying hero's journeys I've seen in a video game, and I have an even bigger appreciation for it after replaying the first game and then the second right after. I seriously think it's brilliant, and I just had to make a video expressing that, so I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for watching.
When it seems you're out of luck, there's just one man who gives a fuck. A friend who'll never leave you stuck. Now who can that friend be? Henry, our hero Henry, the fellow who helps his fellow man. Henry, reliable Henry, he gets the job done the best he can. Oh, oh, oh. Watch out, here we go. Oh, oh,
I can't hear you in the back.
When you want to string your lute and trumpet with your black drum, who will pull a sheep gut out through the creature's rectum? Oh, Henry, we thank you, Henry, the fellow who helps his fellow man. His fellow man, Henry, let's drink to Henry. He gets the job done the best he can. Yeah!
I feel quite hungry.